Hey everyone. So we're still in the early days here at Midnight Library of Baseball. So I appreciate any and all reviews and word of mouth. And to those of you who've spread the show and reached out to me, thank you. And just as an update, I said last week that based on patterns, we'd likely see some crazy runs batted in from the fourth and fifth hitters in the LA Dodgers lineup, Will Smith and Max Muncy, because of course they're hitting behind Mookie Betts, Shohei Ohtani, and Freddie Freeman. So right now, Will Smith is top 20 in RBIs, but the current leader of runs batted in the entire major leagues is Teoscar Hernandez of the LA Dodgers. And Hernandez bats sixth in the lineup, right? So still within that kind of sweet spot. So it'll be fun to continue updating this story and see what happens with the fourth, fifth, and sixth hitters based on who's in front of them. And just a disclaimer, I say a few things during the episode about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny. So if there are any small children or large children listening and don't want to hear certain things, you might want to cover your ears. There are several ways to become a stats. Well, let me just start over. I was going to say stats geek, and I realized that's derogatory. So I'm searching my brain for another word, another term. There's a stats nerd, stats freak, I guess. Not a great alternative. So, okay, I'm looking online. What do you call someone who loves statistics? Okay, what I'm seeing is a statistician. So is this true? There's no endearing, cool word for someone who loves stats, especially today when so many people do love stats. I mean, in all kinds of fields, but especially in sports. So if somebody out there does know, there's a term, let me know. But my gateway to statistics was not generational. My dad liked baseball, but he didn't really talk about it unless it was breaking news, something that everyone was talking about. And I didn't talk baseball with a ton of my friends unless it was linked to baseball cards. By the time I was old enough to start collecting in the 1980s, I had missed the boat by at least 10 years. Because by the 1980s, the baseball card market was saturated. Thousands upon thousands of copies, with collectors and kids conscious at this point of keeping the cards in good shape. The reason baseball cards had so much value, or I'll say sports cards had so much value, was that before the 80s, they had no value. People didn't typically collect them, or at least they didn't hold on to them past childhood and maintain them in good condition, which made most cards rare and valuable. Most people, as kids, shoved them in shoe boxes, they taped them to their walls, they jammed them into their bicycle spokes to create that clicking sound. But even during this absolute glut, there was still, for me and for a lot of people, a lot of kids, there was still the hope of opening a pack of Donruss or Topps or Fleer or Score and finding a $5 or $10 card. But then in 1989, something shifted. A company called Upper Deck released a set of cards unlike anything seen before. From the glossy finish to the color scheme to the trim and the thicker, sturdier cardboard, the cards were luxurious in comparison to what had come before. They even had holograms that changed colors when you shifted the card in the light. Now it might not seem like a big deal, but at the time it was huge. And the packs were made from a thicker foil compared to the wax paper feel of other card packs. It was like every time you opened a pack of Upper Deck, you were opening a present. So, in my opinion, from pack to card, the designers of the 1989 Upper Deck set really hit it out of the park. They were geniuses. And to top it all off, there was the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card. And I'll tie this back to statistics in a minute, but like for me, this connects to the thrill of baseball cards. I remember the frenzy with my friends opening packs and hoping for a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie. And in my mind, even at the time when the set came out, the value was something like $50 or $60. Maybe that came a little later, but that's what I remember. And 20 years after Upper Deck's 1989 set, Sports Illustrated called the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card the last iconic baseball card. And in an online list of top 100 iconic sports cards of all time, number 1 is the Topps 1952 Mickey Mantle. Number 2 is the 1986 Fleer Michael Jordan. Number 3 is the 1909 Honus Wagner tobacco card. And number 9 is the 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr. rookie. So for those of you who experienced this card in this time, you'll remember the big deal. And as I'm talking about this, one last memory comes to mind. For me and my friends, we could easily find Topps and Donruss cards at the local store or pharmacy. But for Upper Deck and later Topps Stadium Club, which came out in 1991, it was hard to find them outside of baseball card shops or card shows. But then the local pharmacy down the street started carrying these luxury brands, and it was awesome. Now, I'm about to divulge a criminal act by myself and my friend at the time. I can't remember if it was Upper Deck or Topps Stadium Club, but you could actually tell if a certain player was going to be in the pack by the last card in the set, in the pack. And there was a way, this is the illegal part, there was a way that if you turned the pack over and just kind of peeled it back a little bit, you could see what that final card was. And then oh, this either is not or this is the pack I'm looking for. So we would do that, like in the back corner of this pharmacy, we would, covertly peel back the back sides of these packs and continue until we'd exhausted the store's supply or found what we were looking for. But I mean, to bring this back to the point of this episode, baseball cards is how I got into statistics. There was something comforting about keeping track of things. And as I said before, following stats was a way to build your history of the game. Some of you may know Dan Carlin, who produces the Hardcore History and Common Sense podcast, and in my opinion, the best history podcast there is. And I'll never forget when Dan Carlin talked about learning history and how kids learn history backwards. It's true. When we're teeny weeny, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, we start learning about events that happened thousands of years ago, events that we as tiny children cannot possibly connect to. The history of a child is what happened yesterday and last week and last month. So, according to Dan Carlin, why not introduce kids to history by starting in the near present and working backwards? I love this idea and would love to see a school implement this strategy. But this is what happened to me with baseball cards. I started learning the stats on those cards from players in the late 1980s, and at some point I became interested in older players, and I compared the stats. Statistics were bridges that connected players and time periods. They were like hosts at a dinner party introducing guests. Ben, have you met Wade Boggs? He hit .361 in 1983 to lead the league. And number 2 in 1983 was Rod Carew, near the end of his career. Carew actually led the league in batting average 7 times, including a .388 average in 1977, and so on and so on. I mean, for me, I didn't learn about my favorite player, Wade Boggs, until he'd been in the league for a while. But I started collecting his cards and then his rookie cards and went backwards and started to learn more and more. And stats also make watching and following baseball games on TV or in the newspaper that much more exciting, interesting. Every time Ken Griffey Jr. hits another home run, I get to notch a line in that column in my notebook and live the journey along with Griffey as he gets closer to the immortals, Ruth and Gehrig and Mantle and Maris, who set the standards in the first place. Now, ever since Bill James and his sabermetrics and stories like Moneyball, the conversation has been shifting away from traditional statistics towards stats that give us a better assessment of a player's abilities now and in the future. Just this morning, I was watching some baseball highlights, and in this game, the Yankees pitcher was pulled in the fifth, and the announcer said, "Wins for pitchers don't matter anymore, but wins for teams still do." And yet, type in Major League Baseball stats for 2024, and one of the top sites will be ESPN. And the first stats you see in hitting are batting average, home runs, and RBIs, two of which I discussed last week. Now, if you go to CBS Sports or MLB.com, you'll find some of the newer, more reliable hitting stats like on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS, on-base plus slugging. But my point is that even though things are changing, they still aren't changing. As we move from hitting to pitching and go to ESPN and CBS Sports, we still see as the top four stats for pitching wins, ERA, or earned run average, strikeouts, and saves. Tonight, I'm going to focus on wins and saves. And if learning the flaws in batting average and RBI is like learning there's no Santa Claus, then learning the truth about wins and saves is adding the Easter Bunny to the hit list. Sorry, not sorry for the upcoming reality wrecking ball to your statistical security blanket. You're listening to the Midnight Library of Baseball, where there are no loud noises, no jarring music, only nostalgic, thought-provoking, emotional stories about baseball. I'm Ben Orlando. Last week, I talked about the RBI as an example of unfairly crediting one player for a team effort. If the RBI is a swordfish in this measure, then the statistic of pitcher wins is a humpback whale. There are so many things wrong with wins by a pitcher, so let's get started. According to John O'Shea, writing for the Bleacher Report in 2011, quote, "Many baseball fans place a kind of special significance on a starting pitcher winning 20 games in a season. 20-game winners are often by default considered serious candidates for that year's Cy Young Award. Even greater significance is given to pitchers who win 300 games over the course of their career. Every 300-game winner who has been retired at least 5 years has been inducted into the Hall of Fame." End quote. In hitting, there's the Triple Crown, RBIs, home runs, and batting average. For major league pitchers, there's the equivalent, referred to as the pitching Triple Crown, which is ERA, strikeouts, and wins. So whether it's the Cy Young Award or the pitching Triple Crown, wins have always factored heavily into our assessment of not only a pitcher's seasonal achievements, but his promise for the next year, which of course directly relates to salary. Here's what author Keith Law thinks of this measure. Quote, "Preventing runs wasn't enough, but somehow the pitcher had to will his teammates to score more runs while he was in the game, while simultaneously exhorting his relievers to pitch well after his departure. This line of thinking, of course, is dumber than a sack of hair." End quote. And what Law is talking about is thinking that the pitcher has control over all these other parts of the game when he doesn't. And yet that's what we unconsciously assume when we see a pitcher win or a pitcher winning 20 or more games. When you're talking about coming to terms with not having a lot of control, you're talking about the life of a major league pitcher. You control the ball coming out of your hand and, to a small degree, any runners on the base path. But that's about it. But let's focus on the obvious flaws to start. As Keith Law mentioned, you can do your part 100% as a pitcher, but you only get a win when your team puts at least one run on the board. Why I like Law's book, Smart Baseball, so much is partly because of the fantastic examples he includes to support his points. In this case, he cited well-known pitcher Pedro Martinez, who in 1995 threw 9 perfect innings. In baseball, there's the rare no-hitter, but even more rare is the perfect game, when a pitcher gives up 0 hits and 0 walks. That was the case for Pedro Martinez in 1995. For 9 innings at least, and that typically constitutes a full baseball game. Except in this case, Pedro's teammates, the Expos, gave him 0 run support. Finally, in the top of the 10th, his teammates came through and scored a run. But Pedro Martinez had to come back on the field, and he ended up giving up a double that broke his perfect game and no-hitter. So why is this happening? Why do we have this statistic that doesn't seem to make sense? As Law pointed out in his book, the whole idea of a win comes from a different era of baseball. As was the case with so many statistics and rules of the game, the win, attributed to the pitcher, was created by Henry Chadwick, aka the father of baseball. This happened in 1884. But as journalist Frank Vaccaro explained, a pitcher's win was not mentioned in the papers until 1888 by the Sporting News, and even then the publication was hesitant. As they published the statistic, the Sporting News added, quote, "It seems to place the whole game upon the shoulders of the pitcher, and I don't believe it will ever become popular, even with so learned a gentleman as Mr. Chadwick to father it." End quote. To me, this is pretty incredible that even at the very beginning, people in high places were skeptical of attributing such a complicated thing as a win to just one man, and they didn't believe it would ever become popular. But pitchers back then aren't what they are today, or vice versa. Before 1890, pitchers could only be removed from the game if they were injured or if they switched positions with someone already on the field. Also, in 1890, Henry Chadwick made a determination about which pitcher gets the win if there's more than one pitcher in a game. He wrote, quote, "Where 2 pitchers took part in a match on one side, we credit the victory or charge the defeat to the pitcher who pitched in the most innings." End quote. Over time, this led to the 5th inning being the hump to overcome. But Chadwick mentioned the pitcher who pitched the most innings, and at this time, starting pitchers pitched a ton of innings. If you look at the list of most complete games in a career, you have to scroll down page after page to find Bob Feller tied for number 356 all time with 36 complete games. And why I'm focusing on Bob Feller is because he's the first person on this list to come after 1920. And again, he was number 356 all time. The record for most complete games in a season is 75 by Will White in 1879. To put this into context, the most complete games in a season since 2000 is, well, let me give you a second to guess. In 1879, Will White had 75 complete games. In 1946, Bob Feller had 36. And in 2011, James Shields had 11, which tops the list in the last 24 years. 75, 36, 11. There's been a major shift in how often pitchers are throwing and how many innings they're pitching. So even though there were dissenters from the very start, Henry Chadwick's reasoning makes more sense when pitchers carried more of the burden on their backs. Since Chadwick's time, there were changes here and there, but according to Keith Law, the job of the starting pitcher remained virtually the same for nearly a century, until the 1940s and 50s, when the role of the relief pitcher became visible, if not prominent. Now, I just talked about complete games. What about actual wins in a season? The record is 60 by Old Hoss Radbourne in 1884. And I'm not making up that name. If you look up the record, you will see Old Hoss Radbourne, a great 1880s name. The last person to win 30 games was Denny McLain in 1968, when he won 31 games. That's 56 years ago. And since then, the closest is Bob Welch, who went 27-6 in 1990. When we return to the Cy Young Award, the highest accolade for pitchers in the major leagues, we see a direct connection between season wins and winning the Cy Young Award. Writer and researcher Monty Seeley conducted an analysis of Cy Young Award winners in each league from 1956 to 2005. He looked at ERA, strikeouts, inning pitched, WHIP, which is walks and hits per inning pitched. And for the National League, Seeley found that the two most relevant categories that would show or predict a Cy Young Award winner were, first, season wins, and second, team finish, or where the team ended up in the division rankings, which has little to do with one pitcher's performance throughout the year. For the National League, pitching wins predicted the Cy Young 63% of the time, and team finish predicted it 59% of the time. For the American League, this discrepancy is even greater, with 64% and 61% for wins and team finish. And the article I'm getting this information from was titled, "The Cy Young Award, Individual or Team Recognition." To show just how problematic pitching wins is as an assessment, let's return to Bob Welch, who won 27 games in 1990 and who won the Cy Young Award. According to Keith Law, quote, Welch, playing for an Oakland A's team that went 103-59 and eventually won the American League pennant, was credited with a 27-6 record that season, but wasn't even the best pitcher in his own rotation, end quote. To reiterate, Bob Welch, who won 27 games in 1990 and won the Cy Young Award, was not only not the best pitcher in the league, but wasn't even the best pitcher on his team. That title would go to Dave Stewart, who was a teammate of Welch's. Stewart went 22-11, but had a better ERA of 2.56 compared to Welch's 2.95. Stewart pitched more innings, 267, compared to Welch's 238, but gave up fewer runs, 84 to Welch's 90. In addition, Stewart also had 39 more strikeouts than Welch, and he had 11 complete games, compared to Welch's 2. But Welch had 27 wins, and Stewart had 22, so that's what stood out. Keith Law, who doesn't pull punches, went on to write, quote, if Welch wasn't even the best pitcher on his own team, where did he rank in the entire American League? Well, the writers of 1990 were apparently as dim as a 10-watt incandescent bulb, because one of the best pitchers in history had one of the best seasons of any starter in the last 50 years in 1990, right under their noses, yet finished second in Cy Young voting, end quote. The player Law is referring to is Roger Clemens, who finished the season with an outstanding 21-6 record. But more importantly, he finished with an ERA of 1.93, which is excellent. There's also the wins above replacement stat, or WAR, which tells us just how valuable a player is to his team. And according to Law, Roger Clemens' WAR rating gave him the 10th best overall pitching season in the last half century, and yet he came in second to a guy with more wins. When we take this a step further and look at the impact of this misconception on actual financial issues, we see millions of dollars on the line. Players with good win-loss records and poor ERAs get signed to million-dollar deals, or they used to. This happened to Sean Estes, who went 15-8 in 2004, but posted a whopping 5.84 ERA, and then signed a big deal. Or Russ Ortiz, who won 21 games in 2003, but also led the league in walks. His 21 wins led to a 4-year, $33 million contract. But the next 3 years, Ortiz posted an ERA of 4.12, 6.89, and 8.14. Another problem for the win stat is that pitchers are responsible for runs even after they leave the game. Say, for instance, Bob Gibson walks a guy or gives up a single and then leaves the game. The relief pitcher comes in, gives up a triple, and that guy on first scores. But because Gibson put him on base, he's tagged for the run, even though 2 pitchers were really responsible for that run. When we look at the objective of winning a game, we can break it down into 2 basic categories. Score as many runs as you can, and limit as many runs as you can. As Keith Law explained, 50% of this effort is already out of the pitcher's hands and completely reliant on the offense. Then there's fielding, which accounts for another percentage, and then there's all the other pitchers in the game. At this point, we're down to 25-30% of what the starting pitcher is actually responsible for. And we still have other factors to consider. The pitcher, for instance, could throw a perfect strike and the umpire may call it a ball. Or he may throw strike 3, but the catcher lets the ball go by and the runner goes to first. Maybe the hitter sticks his bat out and bloops a great pitch into the outfield for a base hit. What's actually happening in the game on the field is not necessarily an indication of the pitcher's abilities. When you look at all the players, all the factors that go into team winning, a starting pitcher is responsible for very little of it. If you like the show and crave more content, you can become a Patreon member, where you'll have access to additional audio episodes, video interviews, and other articles and images linked to the show. Go to Patreon/Midnight Library of Baseball. And since this is a one-man production, every bit of support helps. You can donate at midnightlibraryofbaseball.com, and you can add reviews on iTunes and Spotify. Okay, back to the show. Let's look at one more problematic stat, the save, which is basically when a relief pitcher comes in at the end of the game to shut down the opposition and is then credited with a save. According to Keith Law, quote, "No analyst and no sabermetric stat has done half as much to ruin baseball as the save. The introduction of this statistic led to wholesale changes in how managers handle the final innings of close games and in how general managers build their rosters, all to the detriment of the sport on the field, and perhaps to the pitcher health as well." End quote. The idea of the save, even the term itself, has been around for a long time. From a 2019 Sports Illustrated piece, Ty Cobb had mentioned the save all the way back in 1907. And in 1959, Don Elston, a relief pitcher for the Cubs, said, quote, "Saves are my bread and butter. What else can a relief pitcher talk about when he sits down to discuss salary with the front office?" End quote. Sports writer Jerome Holtzman came up with a new definition of the save in 1959, and 10 years later the save entered the major leagues. So what specifically does it mean? To earn a save, you have to enter the game with a lead, and you can pitch only one inning and get the save as long as the lead is no more than 3 runs. Or you can pitch 3 or more innings at the end of the game and get the save, even if your team is already up by 10 runs. Yeah, it's confusing and weird. And according to John Foley, it's a terrible measure of a relief pitcher's performance. Foley performed an analysis of pitchers from 5 previous seasons with 10 or more saves, and he found that saves did not correlate with earned runs, walks, or strikeouts. You can have a terrible pitcher racking up a lot of saves if he's on a good team with a good offense and a good defense. And the larger issue, according to Keith Law, is that managers started managing and strategizing based on this false stat, or as he put it, quote, managing to the stat, end quote. Teams felt like they needed a good closer, someone who comes in the final innings and gets 3 outs. But then they wouldn't use this pitcher in any other situation. They would save him for the save opportunity and waste the opportunity to use him in the 6th or 7th. And this brings up another misconception, that the 9th inning and the last 3 outs are always the most important of the game, when in fact, any inning could be the most important, depending on what's happening. But we're taught, as fans and people within the game, that the 9th inning is the most important. And this myth spawns the misconception that the closer, the man with the most saves, is the most important pitcher. The Oakland A's in the late 90s proved the myth of the save and the closer, as they made Billy Taylor their closer, then traded him, then elevated Jason Isringhausen, then traded him, then Billy Koch, then Keith Foulke. According to Law, quote, few other teams caught on to the tactic at the time, or they simply didn't want to risk it themselves, even though the A's demonstrated that closers are made, not born, end quote. Law went on to explain that any major league pitcher who can handle the 3rd or 4th or 5th inning can also handle the 9th. And this brings us back to a point from the previous episode about clutch performance and clutch players. If there's no such thing as a clutch player, then you can put any relief pitcher anywhere in the game, and they will do what they're going to do, regardless of the stakes. Today, things are changing. Managers are bringing in different pitchers at different times. They care less now about a win or a save for the pitcher, and they simply focus on what the team needs. So what statistics are a better measure for the relief pitcher? Well, we have to go back to WAR, or wins above replacement, which again is not a statistic, but a construct of multiple statistics to tell us, considering a slew of factors, how important any one player is to a team's success. There's much more digging in the weeds I could do, but I'm going to end there for tonight. And if you have anything to add or any questions, please leave a comment on Instagram at Midnight Library of Baseball, or you can go to my website, midnightlibraryofbaseball.com, or you can send me a direct message to my email at midnightlibraryofbaseball@gmail.com. The music is A Long Way by Sergei Pavkin at Pixabay. Good night.